What's up, family? This is Kristen Smallwood, and you're listening to the Thrive with Joy podcast, a special space I've created for us to come and reason together. Each week, I share life lessons and stories that challenge our perspective on how we're managing the relationships with ourselves, God, and others. I'm even inviting some special guests to help us unpack insights on how to experience lasting, harmonious bonds that abound in grace, forgiveness, and love. Let's get into it. What's up, family? And welcome to the very first episode of the Thrive with Joy podcast. I am so excited to have this opportunity to share with you all that I just want to jump right into this story, right? So when I was when I was younger, there was this nursery rhyme that we were taught that said, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Anytime somebody said something to you that was embarrassing or hurtful, or you just didn't have time to think of a quick comeback, we would use that nursery rhyme to let them know, listen, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish today, it ain't gonna work. Okay. Even if I'm bothered by what you said, I will not give you the satisfaction of letting you know I'm bothered. Not today. Not today. We recited it. We believed it. Anytime somebody said something out of pocket to us, we would recite that rhyme with an attitude, like it was a weapon. And the whole purpose of that nursery rhyme was really to help kids resist the urge to respond physically when someone said something hurtful to them. And it was also to really give grace to the kid who said the awful thing, because let's be honest, more than likely, they didn't have enough social awareness to really understand the impact of what they had said. Or maybe they did understand the impact. They just weren't mature enough to even care. But it was more of like a self-control tool that was really designed to help us deflect negativity and protect us from other people's perception of who we were. The problem with the nursery rhyme is it wasn't true. Like, what we should have been saying is, sticks and stones may break your bones, and the wrong words can absolutely destroy you. Or better yet, the wrong word from you can destroy somebody else. Words are a key driver of conflict in relationships. Your mother's words she spoke to you 20 years ago may still be driving the conflict that exists between you and her today. The words you said to your husband or your wife after your first argument could still be driving the conflict you're experiencing in your marriage today, 5, 10, 15 years later. Like, I get why our parents and our teachers taught us the original saying, because they needed us to build up a level of tolerance for the things we couldn't control. I can't control what someone says about me, but I can control how I respond to it. And they needed us to learn that at an early age, because they knew life was going to hit us one day and we would finally figure out the true power of words and understand that not only do words hurt, but they sting. Not only do they sting, but they can burn like hot bacon grease. Have you ever been burned with hot bacon grease? Listen, let me explain, okay? So one morning, I was at the house. I was hungry, so I decided I'm gonna make some breakfast, right? So I reached into my cabinet and I pulled out this shallow cookie pan and I lined it with aluminum foil. I turned the oven on and I set it to 425. Pulled the bacon out the refrigerator, laid 3 slices of bacon on this ungreased aluminum foil, and I waited until I heard the beeping to let me know that the oven had reached its set temperature, and then I slid the pan of bacon in the oven. The timer was set, 22 minutes. So while the bacon is cooking, I'm multitasking. I'm excited. I'm in and out of the kitchen. I'm doing other things around the house. I'm feeling real good about where this day is headed. When the timer goes off, I go back into the kitchen to check the bacon, hoping it was ready. So I opened the oven. I noticed that 2 other slices of bacon appeared to be perfect, right? I like my bacon crispy. They were crispy. It looked fully cooked. But that third piece was still looking a little more undercooked than I particularly like, right? So I pull out this single pot holder and I put it on my right hand and I pull the cookie pan out of the oven and I place the pan on top of the stove. So I removed the first 2 pieces of bacon and then I placed the pan back in the oven so the third piece could finish cooking. We still feeling good at this point, okay? After a few minutes, I peek into the oven to confirm that the bacon was cooking to my liking. We good to go. I'm ready to pull it out now. So again, I take the single pot holder, put it on my right hand, and I proceed to remove the pan from the oven. The pan has now accumulated a bit more grease than the first time I pulled it out of the oven. And with the absence of the other two pieces of bacon, the weight of the pan was now leaning more to one side. So as I'm raising the pan out of the oven, all of the grease tilts to one side of the pan and proceeds to slide down my arm. Oh my God. I'm trying to tell you, when that hot grease initially hit my wrist, the shock from the intensity of the heat left me completely speechless. Like, I don't even think I screamed. Then once that grease began to penetrate my skin, honey, the way I flung that pan across that kitchen, to this day, I don't know where that bacon went, okay? All I know is I threw that pan like it was the opening pitch at the World Series. I'm convinced when I move out of my house, the new owners will find a piece of bacon above the top of the cabinets just as a sign that I was here, okay? And then I went into full-blown panic mode. Like, I started scrambling, trying to find ways to decrease this excruciating pain that was currently experiencing. Like, I was frantically running the cold water from the sink over my arm, all while trying to kick the refrigerator over to get the ice to come out, the ice dispenser. I think I even ran into the bathroom and started running water in the tub, like just in case I needed to submerge myself in a cold bath just to get the burning to stop. I was literally losing my mind. What just happened? When will this burning stop? Like, why is the heat so intense? How can I stop this pain? Like, these are the things that are running through my head. And I'm thinking to myself, this has got to be the dumbest thing you have ever done. First of all, who cooks bacon in a cookie pan? I had never done that before, okay? That's my confession. I have a whole cabinet of appropriate cook and bakeware, and yet I reached for the cookie pan to cook bacon that I knew would accumulate grease that would rise in the pan, and then proceeded to try and take it out of a hot oven with one hand. It had to be the most careless thing I had ever done. Or so I thought. But then I was reminded of something even more careless and painful that I had done. Not with grease, but with something even more venomous. My words. The difference was, instead of being the recipient of the pain, I was the distributor of it. So here's what happened. In the midst of a trivial debate with a friend of mine, I said some things that immediately set our friendship on fire. I mean, it went from 0 to 425 degrees in 3 seconds. My friend was boiling hot, and I was feeling every bit of that steam, okay? I had taken what was a safe space for us to be vulnerable and flawed and human, and with one slip of the tongue, it was like I had tripped over my own feet, kicked the table over, ripped the curtains down, the light had broken through the window, and the reflection was now burning a hole in the carpet of that space. It was no longer safe. That's what happens when we're not mindful of the things that we say. We destroy safe spaces. We eliminate the opportunity for people to process and heal from their trauma. You saying whatever you feel like you have a right to say to me might free you, but it incarcerates me. It robs me of my right to be unguarded in your presence. Now, every time I see you, I have to do a safety check. I have to make sure I have my extinguisher in hand just in case you start firing off something crazy. I have to keep the scissors in my pocket just in case I have to cut myself loose from your judgment and self-righteous assumptions. I even have to keep the duct tape close just in case I need to tie my hands together to keep from choking you out. You went from being a safe space to being a threat. But safe spaces are where relationships thrive. Here's the thing. I made a mistake. I sincerely didn't mean what I said. Unfortunately, accidents and mistakes still have consequences. My burn risk was a self-inflicted injury that only impacted me. However, there were two injured parties when I shot off those reckless words. I can't explain my logic behind why I said the things I said to my friend any more than I can explain why I decided to cook bacon in a shallow cookie pan. They were both poor decisions made by a normally sane but flawed individual. It's not my nature to be that careless with the handling of my food or my friends. But here's what I learned from those two incidents. The first thing was, when you find yourself in these types of situations, you have to stop the burning immediately. You cannot afford to wait to address the burning. Not only was I trying to cool down the burning on my arm, but I was taking off clothes that the grease had got on because I didn't want to accidentally burn other parts of my body. Did you hear me say I was about to get in the tub? Like, I was prepared to do whatever it took to get some relief. I spent the next half an hour going back and forth between running my arm under cold water to placing an ice pack over it to popping a leaf. Like, I assumed the more attention I applied to the wound in its initial stages, the more likely I was to reduce the overall damage that would be done and would ultimately help the healing process to be more effective, right? But when it comes to relationships, as soon as you recognize you made a mistake, stop the burning. Apologize. Even if the person is not in a place to receive it, you have to take that initial step to lower the intensity on that situation. The longer you wait to acknowledge that you were offensive, the hotter and more intense the tension will be between you two. You have to start the cool down process. Sometimes that's all people really want. We all have the need to be heard and considered. That initial apology is like cold water to a burn. Even if that person is still mad and they're not trying to hear what you have to say, apologize anyway. Because once that person calms down, the fact that you acknowledge that you offended them may be the very thing that buys you an opportunity to make it right. Now, let's be honest. That first apology is often weak at best, right? Because you probably haven't had time to fully process the offense. You probably haven't fully considered what you said, how you said it, why you said it, and how they may have interpreted what you said to react the way that they did. All you know is that you offended them, and now you're in conflict. Now, in order for me to figure out what it would take for me to recover from that grease burn, I had to first get myself to a calm, stable place so that I could think clearly. That's why I was back and forth between the cold water and the ice pack and the pills. It was all about calming the storm so I could seek clarity. It's the same concept with relationships. That initial apology is necessary, but you will still have to get clarity on the impact of your words and or actions so you can address the issue more thoughtfully. You might have to apologize several times before it actually lands with that person. But as the saying goes, an apology delayed may be an opportunity lost. Now, the second thing is you have to apply a protective covering. So here's what I learned when I was trying to figure out how to nurse my burn. The skin is the body's first line of defense against external elements, right? So when you have a burn injury, that open wound where that skin has broken makes the body more susceptible to infection. If that wound gets infected, that infection can spread and impact other parts of the body and derail the healing process. You have to not only cover it, but you have to cover it properly. You have to apply the ointments and the gels that are specific for burn injuries. You have to use gauze that are dry and sterile. And then throughout the recovery period, you have to inspect the dressing. Make sure it's staying in place and it doesn't have an odor to it or hasn't gotten wet in the process of you showering or going throughout your day. If it has, then you have to be prepared to change it and put on a new dressing. Okay? Now, in order to restore those safe spaces that we tear down with our words, we have to make sure we're covering that relationship even while it's in its broken state, which means you have to be careful not to run and tell everybody about what happened and expose that relationship to people who are not equipped to help you nurse that wound. Not everyone is invested in the success of that friendship, that marriage, that work relationship. Some people are waiting to see that thing fall apart. They hope y'all break up. You have to cover that relationship in prayer and wisdom. You don't need to go to people who will co-sign behavior that you know was wrong, because they will have you believing you were justified in how you treated the other person, and you will then diminish your responsibility in trying to rectify the situation. And the fire will keep burning. If you're going to seek counsel and advice on how to deal with your situation, make sure you go to someone that will give you honest, constructive feedback. Somebody that loves you and has your best interest at heart. Someone who has a history of maintaining healthy, productive relationships. If every relationship they're in is raggedy and holding on by a thread, you may not want to engage them for this particular conversation. Maybe you go to them when you need financial advice, right? But they may not be the best person to keep the infection from spreading in this situation. And then the last thing I learned was you have to give the wound time to heal. To me, this is the hardest part. Like, I have a tendency to pick at scabs. I can't help it. It's like I want to peek under to see how the healing is going instead of just leaving it alone and letting the process work. My impatience pushes me to want to fast forward to the part where the blisters have dried up and the skin is regaining its color because I'm anxious to know what the final scar is going to look like. But when I do that, all I'm doing is prolonging the process and making it go on longer than it has to. In that same spirit, sometimes we have to allow space for people to process their own thoughts and emotions in their own way. I know space can be scary, right? Silence can be loud. We want to know what the person is thinking. How do they feel? Do they hate me? Do they love me? Are they secretly plotting revenge on me or just intentionally shutting me out of their life altogether? It's nerve-wracking. We want to control their response because it makes us feel less guilty for putting them in that position in the first place. Sometimes you have to fight the urge to even call or text or try to hang out with them the way you normally do, and let them dictate how they want to engage in the relationship until y'all can get back on the same page. Like, I had to reset my expectations. I had to brace myself to deal with the reality and the disappointment in the fact that they just weren't feeling me right then. The excitement I was so used to them having whenever we communicated in any form just simply wasn't there. Like, talking to me was now a conscious task that they debated on each time they were faced with the decision. I could tell that every word that was communicated was laced with caution. Just enough info to respond, but not enough info to be engaged. Here's the good news. My grease burn eventually healed, right? The blisters dissolved. I used the ointment that my doctor prescribed, and it helped the torn skin to grow back together. There's a very small scar that still remains, but even now, after all this time, I still maintenance that scar by putting cocoa butter on it in hopes that the color will completely blend in with the color of the rest of my wrist so it's not even visible anymore. You'll be excited to know that me and my friend are doing better than ever. Like, the safe space has been restored, and we have increased our level of grace for each other. Healing is possible when change is experienced. The healing process and length is really different for everyone. Like, I had to work hard to be forgiven and to forgive myself for the harm I had caused us both. That was the best I could do. I believe that's all God required of me, and I had to trust Him to do the rest. Here is the best advice I have for anyone who has gone through a similar situation as me, where you have allowed the carelessness of your words to ignite fires in your relationships that you're still trying to put out, or you're someone who has been burned by those words. I encourage you to continue applying the ointment of love, patience, and long suffering to those fresh wounds, and cover them in a bandage of understanding. Like, be mindful that there will be times where you have to let the wound heal and allow each other space to process what has happened. A small scar may result from the accident. The prayer is that when you think about that scar, you won't be reminded of the burning pain that you felt or the hurt that was endured. Instead, you will appreciate the healing that took place and admire the way God took that broken, blistered mess and molded it back together again. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with a friend. Post about it on social media, or feel free to leave a rating and review. And of course, follow or subscribe to the Thrive with Joy podcast on your favorite streaming platform: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts, to make sure you're notified when new episodes are available. All new episodes are released on Mondays. Until next time, family, I pray that God bless you to live in peace and thrive with joy.